Good evening and welcome to Flat Earth United. Joining me this evening is YouTuber Subtle Infinity. How you doing, Subtle?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. We were chatting before the show, and I explained pretty much straight away that a fellow YouTuber, Cathexis, had got in touch and said how pleased he was that you were on the show this evening because you're one of his favourites, and you talk about the bigger picture. Now, obviously, we're going to get into some flat Earth discussions while we're talking, but also a few of the side category subjects that have come up and sprouted into the flat Earth community, like race, which until now hasn't been an issue, or at least I haven't considered it to even be an issue. It wasn't something that crossed my mind. But again, before the show, we talked a little bit about the transgender thing that's creeped in, which you're not particularly interested in. I'm looking at it for entertainment purposes. But yeah, overall, we're going to be chatting about the bigger picture, i.e. the things that you, if you were a globe head, you'd look at flat Earth and go, what's the point? What does it mean? Why is it important? And the majority of people who can say that don't realize what the bigger picture is, the greater influences that come to people like our audience and indeed my guests. So with that said, maybe you can tell us a little bit about how, first and foremost, you did find out that the Earth is flat.
Okay, well, I actually got introduced to the flat Earth with a friend of mine who he's actually a YouTuber too. His name is Thomas. He does his channel is DMT Freak, I think it is, and he just asked me. He was just like, have you heard about flat Earth? And I was like, no, I haven't. And he just was like, you need to look into it. I really need to know like how your perspective is. And then it was a few months after that. I mean, I was on that tidal wave of information for a while and really just went through it rather quickly and connected the dots rather quickly because I kind of pieced together a lot of the information that surrounds the flat Earth, which is why I focus a lot more on the human story, not just so much on the Earth is flat or the Earth is not a globe. So yeah, we speak. We were friends in reference to a lot of the external information. So when he asked me, he kind of introduced me, and then I just went from there, and then kind of did my own thing ever since then.
Was there a particular aspect? I mean, was it lack of curvature or water, or what particular aspect of it was it that cemented it for you, though?
It was everything. I mean, I'm I just started to see. I mean, just like we see it today, it makes sense. Like the things that make sense. So lack of curvature. I already had researched that. I had actually seen the Astronauts Gone Wild documentary in 2011 or something like that. It was like right before I started my little like journey. And I watched it, and it was around the same time that I was researching kind of Hollow Earth stuff back then at the same time. Because that time I was looking at aliens and Sasquatch and all that other stuff, and Hollow Earth popped up back in around 2011, and so I already had that stuff in the background. And then when it presented itself, I had already had no love for NASA. I was like, oh yeah, they're full of shit. I just didn't know, to the depths of what that really meant. And then once a few years had passed, and then in 20, I think it was like spring of 2014 is when I actually got asked that question. And then I went into, piecing it together. So all of my confirmations and discernment had already been pretty much completed. So when I had looked at the information that was available from people who had already pieced together all of this work, it was just like, oh, okay, now I see how all this fits together. This is making a lot more sense. So I kind of just let it sit out for a while. And specifically, what really hit me was the lack of curvature was probably the one main thing that was big for me, because my one of my first videos in reference to flat Earth was speaking in reference to um, being in the army. I was actually working on a boat, and I have proof with my own eyes of seeing sailboats that couldn't have been over like 40 feet, maybe 50 feet at the most, but maybe like averages like 30 and 40 feet, with my own eyes being able to see 22 miles out on the horizon, and then being able to see them even further with binoculars. So I've spent years looking at the horizon. I mean, hours upon hours was my job, just staring at the horizon, waiting for something to pop up because it was so damn boring sitting there, you know, doing your job. So once that was there, I was like, wait a second. And I also had a background of quartermaster, which is where you have to lay out the charts, you have to lay out the maps to actually piece together our courses, where we're going. So that was my job. So I had connections with all these maps, and I knew Mercator, that word, that name was good, was instantaneously a trigger for me, because I had already knew that the only maps that you use for nautical charts that you use in the Army are Mercator charts. We don't use any other ones when we're going upon the water. So to keep it like all the same, and again, like everything in the military is all the same. So once I saw that, I was like, wait a second. Now we still use these Mercator maps today, and these Mercator maps go all the way back to the original map makers of the, you know, the empire, the colonial empire, and so on and so forth. So wait a second, I need to start questioning this, because I searched the earliest Mercator map, which is of the North Pole, and I saw that land up there. I was like, wait a second, how come this stuff is not happening on the maps that we see today? So once I started that, and then I was also surrounded by a lot of atlases. Like my mom had a lot of atlases in the house. She had a lot of she gave me, or the family gave me, a Hubble book for my birthday, like the images from Hubble, like a $50 damn book, and I loved it. And I even had, you know, images blown up of the Hubble telescope. And then so I was surrounded by all that stuff, and then I started to realize, once I watched these videos that were saying, wait a second, you know, this CGI, I mean, it's obviously fake as shit. I mean, nothing of it looks real. And I'm looking at this and thinking, like, wait a second, the university system charges you tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars to go to school. These books cost $50. Like, this information is all, it just makes too much sense. So once I started to look into it even further with new eyes, and that's when it was started to make a lot more sense after all. And then I just kind of went into my own perspective of how flat Earth fits in with the rest of the pictures I have already seen.
So it's probably why you're a content producer, because it's similar to my story. It's more of a realization. In other words, you come to flat Earth and go, right, that fits with everything I've experienced already. So it's not like you have to suddenly go out and look at the maths for the curve, you know, although that's great. And I've watched those videos too. It's a cementing of what you've already experienced through every single fiber of every being that you've lived for all of your life. The Earth is flat. That's just the way it is.
Yeah, yeah, I started off with that. It was like, it's definitely not a globe. And that was enough of me being pissed off to be like, all right, well, if it's not that, well, then what else have we been lied to about? What else is there out there? And the sciences of the nature of the flat or the infinite plane or whatever it is, they will come to be on their own. But right now, there's a lot of information that is available that we are not paying attention to, which is kind of my focus, because they're the so-called powers that be utilize that ignorance, utilize that lack of looking into these things from your own perspective for their own benefit. And if we don't become aware of how these stories have all interconnected, then a lot of people who are half informed will be just chattel into another storyline.
Well, this is the thing that I don't want people to think that they'll go to your channel and immediately see loads of curvature charts, because that's not what you're about. And you're exposing the bigger picture. And that's really where your material's absolutely fascinating, because where I would talk about the psychopathic control grid, you're you're explaining it in detail. You're actually giving it some substance rather than just a few buzzwords, and explaining the Hegelian dialectic and the divide and conquer, and detailing it for people to actually see it. And this is something that is part of a deception that isn't necessarily key to seeing that the earth is flat, but it's the expansion of a realization that we are massively deceived and massively controlled. And the ways and means that that is perpetrated is what's explained in detail on your channel. Maybe you can start there, because now we've got past the flat earth bit, make sure the title's correct for the show. But yeah, now we're past that, if we can get on to the bit that's more interesting about what you actually do on your channel.
Yeah, it's definitely a gauge to see, not necessarily that the earth is flat. Like, I don't go into so much that the earth is flat, but to see that why the intentions of telling you that the earth is a globe on a human perspective, on a psychological perspective, on a soul, spiritual and physically being controlled and making a profit off of individuals, why the depths of something so sinister has to be installed into children, installed into adults, and has to be expanded upon every single day through every single movie, every single TV show, news event. Anytime you see a meteorologist on the Weather Channel, you say, "Oh, look at this! It's a damn globe." That's what they're telling you. They don't give a shit about you looking at the rain. They tell you, "Look at this globe. Shut up and just look at this globe. Now go back to work." That's what this mind control. So that's where I focus my energy on, is mind control as a whole, how the experiencer is affected by the experience, both the illusion and the empowered space of, what our potential is as human beings and this experience as a whole. Like, questioning that is more of where I come from, because I don't really like focusing too much on the NASA deception or the bankers and all this other stuff. I've gone through that. I understand where it fits, but it's really just a subcategory. In my perspective, it's a subcategory to, on one end, and also set up the focus that maintains the platform for the next mind control program. That's where I come from when I speak about all the information about being separated from your ancestors, separated from the spiritual connections to nature, each other, your culture, the history, all of the information that keeps you from making those deep connections. The intention there is to keep people disempowered. Because once people become empowered by making real organic connections with themselves on the inside out, with their culture, with their history, with the land, with the ancestors, that is the power grid that cannot, it's the organic power grid that cannot be manipulated. It cannot be chatteled into a particular level of consciousness that adds into what we're experiencing today with the fiat currency system, the maritime admiralty system, and all of the systems that give our power away. That's why I focus a lot on revealing that, the importance of, being aware of NASA being full of shit, being aware that, the politics and the fiat currency system is all engaged within this story. But if you really want to make a difference, you have to find out the positions internally and spiritually, psychologically, and physically that empower yourself. Because as long as we keep pointing the fingers at the lies, you can point the fingers at the lies forever, as long as you want. But if you don't figure out what the truth of your experience is, you're never going to be able to address anything that these so-called powers that be have generated.
Yeah, it's evident when you're watching your videos that you hint at these subjects that you call side categories, but it's clear that you have a good understanding of them. Occasionally you'll hint towards specific religious aspects, but you won't necessarily detail them. But it's clear that you understand where the deceptions actually are being perpetrated. You don't have to detail them. So it might be that some I've got to say this, I'm sorry. Some of the newer flat earthers who come to this subject might go into your channel and just, the jaws are going to be on the floor. It's going to be a bit of information overload for some people, but that's the same with any good stuff. You know, it's not necessarily easy to take in. For me it is, but for some people it won't be. But that's not to say that it's not all very, very pertinent information. And if you were coming to your videos first, I'd love that. Sort of right in the deep end. This is how badly we are being deceived. Oh my God.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't mind people losing their shit when they come on my channel. I expect that. I mean, because I've been getting hit with that with all the other information that I've been researching even before Flat Earth. It's expected, and that's a way that people learn. Like, people in my family have learned that way. The only way they know how to ask questions is by yelling, "I don't know how to do this shit. That's them asking for help. So when somebody like vomits on me all of their religious or scientific um, background to discredit me, to add credibility to their own perspective, I expect that and just kind of go along with it and just do my own thing, because it's only up to the individual in their own timing to change and do whatever it is that they're going to do in reference to being aware of this information. You can't force anybody to become a flat earther. You can't force anybody to look at this information. They're going to have to do it when they are ready. And if they are not ready, the main thing to do is just put the brakes on, say, look, stop, you're crazy, something's wrong with you, and that's it. And they shut down. And that's expected, because you're literally shifting worlds right now. You're shifting an entire universe. This entire universe has been generated. The synthetic universe has been generated in order to create your reality. So, I mean, what are you going to expect when you completely rip somebody's universe out of their brain? You know?
Yeah, the globe is a mental construct, and taking that away from somebody is mentally, it's like, I don't want to use the word abusive, because it's not like we're doing it to be cruel to these people in the slightest. In fact, you know, we're not trying to do it to anybody. They come by their own free will to our videos to watch this information. But by the same token, it is kind of what's the right
It's
word?
painful.
Painful.
It's definitely painful.
It is painful. It's a mentally painful to hear this sort of information.
Yeah.
But before we go on too much of a tangent about that, maybe you can. I've thrown out a few buzzwords: Hegelian dialectic. I've thrown out. Did I say divide and conquer? Maybe not. But maybe if you can not summarize, but explain what we mean by some of these terms. But yeah, we are divided and ruled by our masters, and maybe you can explain that to the layman first. I'm sure we'll get in more depth as we go on.
Well, the Hegelian dialectic is sort of a key word that I use, or phrase that I use, in order to reference the divide and conquer as a whole. With people, how I've been recently relaying it to take it a step even further, is to expand it upon not having any roots or foundation. So if you are divided, that means you are not connected to your maximum potential. It's like cutting a battery in half and having it barely connected. So there's no real power right there. You can't really tap into it. So what happens when you cut that battery in half, which is a psychological battery, a spiritual battery, and a physical battery, chaos is the outcome in that that action. So in this chaos, these so-called powers that be can create a scenario where they become the saviors, you become disempowered, and they can generate an entire storyline based upon the chaos as a whole. And then you figure out the most comfortable scenario is to fall into one of the categories of the Hegelian dialectic. Are you a Democrat? Are you a Republican? Are you a flat earther? Are you a globe earther? Are you this? Are you that? Are you black? Or are you white? Whatever it is, you are divided because you have no idea where you truly come from, where your power, your origin comes from. And while we are being sucked into that on every level, and I explain it as in reference to the chessboard. So the Hegelian dialectic, or the distraction programs, are really based upon checker games that are being played one against the other. And the mainstream program is to get you locked up into either side of the checker game. Meanwhile, there is a chess game for your mind, for your soul, and for your body that is happening behind the scenes. And since that is happening behind the scenes, that is the subconscious chaos that occurs where we don't realize it because we are caught up in the conscious or the materialistic realm of reality that is based upon this against this. And that is the mainstream thought process. So the outcome, like I said, the outcome of any of divide and conquer programs is chaos, because now the individuals who installed that program of divide and conquer can now be the saviors of your reality, can now persecute you for being wrong. So they can save you from the reality, and they can also steer your reality wherever it is that they want to go that will best benefit the powers against the have-nots.
Very concise. And we ultimately, even the people who appear to have money, are ultimately the have-nots, the ones that are kept under control. Who do you think are the haves?
As long as there are have-nots, it doesn't matter who the haves are. The haves exist. There are have-nots. There's no difference. It doesn't matter if you got $1 million or if I got $20. We're the same people, because it's somebody out there selling these programs that are locking up our brothers and sisters, that are creating paradigms where people are living impoverished all across the world. So to me, I don't even get caught up in that who are what and pointing the fingers. Does the system exist? Fuck yeah, it exists. So what are we going to do about it? That's my question. I don't give a shit about reptilians or the Watchers and the Republicans and the cabal and all that shit. You can see whatever story it is from however perspective is comfortable for you. That's fine. Not saying you specifically, I'm just saying in general. But when people face it from where they're comfortable. Like I was comfortable when I was looking at David Icke's information. I was comfortable with these fucking reptilians, man. We got to get these holographic assholes and all this other stuff. And then you stay on that, and then you realize, well, David Icke ain't really saying nothing different. Damn years, he's saying the same shit. What is he actually really doing? What is he really saying? Well, there's no real empowerment there. It's only pointing fingers. That's why I don't really like getting into that, because the real power exists in the individual making real connections with their power grid. It's a difference between revealing lies and understanding, and overstanding the truth. That's a lot of work, and it could take an entire lifetime that people do not pay attention to because we get so caught up in, well, who are the bad guys? Well, go ahead and keep looking for that. I'll be over here.
I completely agree. I mean, it's one where I've tried to explain this in terms of when people try and explain the who, you always get to the system, and it might be that the who was 500 or 1,000 years ago that has come up with the bullshit, and the people who currently perpetrate it don't even realize. And the simplest way of explaining this is to look at any recent convert to flat earth. They were the who that we would be pointing at, because they'd be perpetrating the globe lie. That doesn't necessarily make them our enemy. In fact, it doesn't make them our enemy. It makes them another person. And I think this was in your last video, you kind of said this. People are people. Michael Jackson, it doesn't matter if you're black and white, is very, very true. Everybody is just another person. However, I mean, I'm not going to bring you on this line. This is my line. But when it does come to the who, there is a particular type of person, the psychopaths, that do perpetrate certain types of evil. So there are certain individuals you can point to, and they can, in my view, be categorized. But that's not what you're doing. Like you say, you're exposing the how, the system of how they actually perpetrate it, which is why I want this conversation to go on those lines as opposed to the who. But I was interested to see your reaction to the who. That was unexpected, but a pleasant surprise, because it's completely true, and I can completely relate, as I did, back to the deception with the globe. Just because Brian Cox tells us that we've landed on the moon doesn't mean that he's an evil dude out there to deceive us. He is ultimately deceived, but by the system, by the deception that's been in place potentially for a very, very, very long time. Now, I've just mentioned race, and I've had plenty of black guests on this show. It's not something that has ever been an issue in terms of flat Earth until very, very recently, where the subject has come up more and more and more. I don't know why, but now it seems to be an issue within flat Earth. And I don't know if we're going to nip that massive cultural issue in the bud on this show, but by the same token, it's something we can certainly talk about. So where do we start? That's the question, I suppose.
Well, to step off of the last statement that I said, that statement that I made is not to say that the actual information that exists that adds up to who you can see fits in these pictures is not important. That's definitely a part of it. There's like this abstract, and there's a linear, there's the nonlinear and the linear. You can't just focus on one or the other. That's like the New Age program says, well, since there's war and destruction, we should just be love and light. It's like you're just creating another linear program. You can't just look the other way and act like this stuff doesn't exist. So in order to address both the linear and the non-linear information and the storylines that are facing us, we can't get caught up in either or one or the other, which is why I focus a lot of on the importance of realizing the human story that is running side by side to the heliocentric or the flat earth story, because you're talking about the experience, which is a mirror image of the experiencer, and vice versa. So the storylines that add up to the power grid, how I approach this program is to realize the origins and the questions of this, how this power, how the so-called powers that be became so-called powers that be. How did that exist? How did it start? Step by step. You don't have to go into the school books of history and all that other stuff. You have to be acknowledging what has actually happened, where the power is today, who's benefiting from it, what systems still exist. So like a lot on my channel, I still reference the term white supremacy and white privilege and all of that stuff that still exists today. There's an entire millions of people who still go upon their lives every day completely ignorant of the fact that that exists. I'm not trying to point fingers at anybody when I say that this stuff exists. What I'm saying is that it exists. There is stuff that's attached to that existence where people benefit and other people are being enslaved and impoverished and held down. You have the Queen of England. Like you have like if I were to ask anybody, like, what do you think that it's right that the Queen of England owns Canada? Like, is that like a thing? Like, okay, so if that's not right, then what are we going to do about that? So if that's a whole thing like that exists in reference to power, so it's addressing the power from the origins, tracing it one step back in time, coming at it from a perspective of power, but recognizing and acknowledging that race definitely is a part of the control grid on the psychological, spiritual, and physical level. This stuff exists. And as long as we don't address it, then it will just expand like a cancer just underneath the surface. And the so-called powers that be who need that cancer to exist just underneath the surface so they can be the saviors of the next control grid. So the reasons why I address race on my videos a lot is because that's still, like we were talking about how painful it is to mention flat earth to people. Well, it's even more painful to tell somebody white supremacy exists. Get that shit in your head in some kind of way and realize that the only way this is going to change is if it's at first acknowledged. You can't change or heal anything until all of it is first acknowledged.
Yeah.
So it's not a surprise. Go ahead.
What I took from that video was essentially you're saying, not to me directly, but if I point the finger at me because I'm here, you're saying it's not good enough that you aren't burning a cross in my backyard and calling me a nigger. It's not good enough that we're having a pleasant conversation because that doesn't acknowledge the bigger problem that does exist regardless of how pleasant I as an individual am to you, or we are in our social circle. So the reason I phrase it like that is because I'm trying to address something that would do exactly that, which would be to nip it in the bud in a small community of flat earthers. And what you're saying is completely the opposite. That's simply not good enough, because the issue still exists. There are still white supremacists. There are still people perpetrating those systems. And again, I'll preface that by saying that, like the globe head, those people might not necessarily be at fault if it's the control system that's at fault for creating that in the first instance. So getting to the deeper picture of why that happens in the first place starts at addressing that it's actually happening. Am I correct in that long that long diatribe?
To build on top of that, it's also crucial to realize that all of these other stories that are out there, like that relationship that you just explained, it also works as a defense mechanism, so that stuff like white supremacy and just like heliocentrism will not be at all addressed. It will not, if you do not acknowledge, see, like technology, like Western civilization and all this other stuff is sold to the populace as the best thing, the best evolutionary step of humanity. And since it's sold to us as this with bells and whistles all over it, it's sold to us to distract us from going to the depths of the origins of the story. So that's just to build, you see what I'm saying? To build on top of it. Like,
I don't follow with the bit where you said it's a defense mechanism.
Okay, so the good relationships that exist that you just explained, like just because you are this person and I am this person, just because we have a good relationship doesn't mean that such and such and such and such. So, okay, that actually is amplified within the individual internally and the collective as a whole to distract, to keep people from going further into realizing that this stuff needs to be addressed. So since people are so happy and comfortable in their one black friend that they have, you see what I'm saying?
So I am effectively enabling it to take place.
Yes, that's what technology does. That's what mainstream media does. Hollywood, TV shows, VH1, BET, all of these TV shows that are saying, hey, racism doesn't exist anymore. This stuff is all great. You're like, wait the fucking second right now. What are we doing? But that's the defense mechanism, is to hide the wounds that have not been seen and addressed.
So why is this in existence in the first place? I mean, if I use myself as an example, I grew up in a part of Birmingham, England that was predominantly black. So I was in the minority as a white person where I grew up. And to me, growing up, that was never drawn attention to. So that was just normal. It didn't seem like anything out of the ordinary. Life just went on as normal, and people were just people. It didn't matter what color they were. I was in a very multi-ethnic area. But because it was never particularly drawn attention to by my parents, it went unnoticed until I got into mild, till I left that part of Birmingham and realized that everyone around me was extremely racist. And it was only then that you realize that when you're in the thick of another community, you're just part of a community. It doesn't matter what anybody around you is actually like or doing, but there are differences. There are obviously differences between how certain communities actually do behave and how they go about their day-to-day life. Well, in my opinion, differences should be celebrated. I don't know how you feel about it. Maybe you can speak to that.
Yeah, definitely. This is why I express so much importance in reconnecting with your roots, reconnecting with your ancestors. There's a beautiful meaning and purpose to the differences between a man and a woman. There's a beautiful difference in meaning between this culture and that culture and that culture and that, because this group of people plays music this way because that is coming from the essence of their soul. That music sounds completely different from this music on the other side of the world. That existing is coming from something inside that is organic, that is natural, and it's beautiful. And so that exists. What we get caught up in is we get locked into the so-called powers that be, how they have calibrated those differences to work against us. So like you were saying, you grew up in a particular community that was diverse in nature. If you really want to understand humanity and the story of humanity, just look at how children interact with each other. That's the most natural engagement, where you won't be locked into all this other stuff that's been downloaded into our reality. So since we've lost connection with that inner child, we've lost connection with the roots of our ancestors in our reality, and we've completely been polarized to lock ourselves into the defense mechanisms of us against the so-called powers that be, and what the so-called powers that be have generated for us to see how this exists, and so on and so forth. So what really happens is we get locked into the microcosm, while the macrocosm of the entire, which I relate to the subconscious programming, the macrocosm of the entire collective control grid is continually expanding, because we are shrunk down to the microcosm of, I don't like that person, I don't like this neighbor, I don't like that race, I don't like this, this linear interpretation of our reality. Meanwhile, the non-linear subconscious program is expanding through television, movies, the heliocentric model, and so on and so forth. It's expanding around us, and we don't know why, because our history books have been burned, because our connection with our ancestors have been severed, because all of this information has been kept from us on purpose in order to maintain the separation of the microcosm and the macrocosm as a whole.
Maybe you can detail that when you say at a subconscious level. I mean, something that I touched on again before flat Earth was subliminal programming. But you touched on this a little bit earlier when you said it's everything, it's everywhere, it's on all of our music. Maybe you can give that a bit more substance though, because when you explain it in I don't want people to hear buzzwords that some will understand and some don't get the full essence of. So I know I'm trying to get you to dumb it down a little bit, but if you can do that anyway for me, that'd be brilliant.
Okay, well, just look at Hollywood. Like it's everywhere. We look at Hollywood. Okay, let's take a time travel. Let's jump in the DeLorean and go back to 1930 right now. Let's sit in Atlanta in 1930 and see what's happening down the street, and watch that individual being drugged down the back of a car for 10 miles and people clapping and applauding because that individual was, wrongly accused of rape or wrongly accused of whatever. Like, all of this information still exists subconsciously when you look at Hollywood, when you look at the White House and the politics, when you look at the so-called powers that be, or of the individuals who are making these decisions for the entire Earth community. So when you listen to music, when you see the mainstream media, the fact that the mainstream media exists as a whole, and when you look at Fox News, when you look at CNN and MSNBC, when you look at who are your leaders? What do your leaders look like? What is great? What is the greatness of Great Britain? What is all of this America number one? What is that number oneness of America? Why is America lumped, or the United States lumped into the entire interpretation of the idea of America? These separations all exist out there. You are simultaneously separated from the origins, the true connections of, or the beauty of your diversity, and at the same time, the lack of diversity is celebrated. That is what is happening in the mainstream media, in Hollywood, in the music, in your politics, and in the subcategories that are being amplified by the so-called powers that be. That's what I mean in reference to subconsciously being programmed. We don't question the fact that the majority of teachers in inner cities or so-called minority neighborhoods are of a Caucasian background. We don't question that, and we don't really question how that affects the so-called subconscious of the so-called minorities. We don't question that. We just accept that as our reality. But what I'm saying is that if that stuff exists, it will definitely have an effect on your psychology. It definitely does have an effect on your relationships, and it will have an effect on the movement of humanity as a whole. And if it's not addressed, then it will only expand. So what's happening right now is, since people have been so dumbed down and comfortable with the idea of all of these systems existing the way they do, we don't really know what needs to change or what we need to do to really make those changes, because we don't even know that it exists, that needs to be changed in the first place. It's accepted as our reality that the Queen of England is the queen of the world, that America has full right to, or the United States has full right to go spread some freedom and make regime changes with all kinds of other people. That's all just accepted by people right now, because we don't know our true power. We don't know our real connections to this reality.
But this is unfortunately the bitter reality. I mean, it's all. I try and smile through the shows when there's hard truths that we have to face. But you come to something like Flat Earth, or I came to Flat Earth, and now with people like yourself, you're highlighting that there is major issues that we do have to address. We may not know how to address them, but the first step, like with racism, is to actually acknowledge that it's happening. And the same can be applied, taking it one step back, internally, or with regards to oneself. You have to realize your own power and realize that if you don't understand that power, it will ultimately be stolen from you and hijacked and used by other people who are using it for their own ends. They're not using it to benefit you. So it's a step in the right direction to first realize what is actually happening. It doesn't necessarily mean you've got all the answers, but that's the first step. Where we go from here is anybody's guess. This is a blossoming thing that seems to expand off the back of Flat Earth, and I'm all for, you know, tagging everything up with Flat Earth to get this sort of information out to people, because this sort of information is where the genuine value lies, because it's on that road to progress. Flat Earth may not change anything. If everybody simultaneously realized it, there'd be pandemonium. But if it trickles into the community and eventually everyone changes the cosmology of their understanding, would it really stop any of the so-called powers that be doing what they do? Well, my answer to that is probably not. Whereas what you're highlighting does, it sets people on a different path, a path to realizing who's in control and why they're in control and how they've got to where they are. So my next question was going to be, which is probably why I've rambled so I can think of a different question, was going to be how do we actually address this? But maybe I should ask that anyway, even though you've said you don't know. Speculation is still fine. Why not?
So the first question, so the first step one is acknowledgement. That could take years. It could take decades. There's so many people that need to acknowledge, and it's really just making or reaching a critical mass of that acknowledgement. The step that happens, that step two, that actually is part of step one, if you do it organically the right way instead of just linearly. Step two is actually the tracing back of the origins of what you have just acknowledged. In that step two, which is actually the same as step one, if you do it all the right way, because some people I used to take the hard head route, just like barrel through it and be like, oh, this is it, and then have to go back and then do it to see where all this stuff begins. But now I approach everything that I'm acknowledging at the same time. I'm approaching it by understanding, overstanding, and understanding its origins. So step two is also to decipher and ask, where did this stuff start? How did this stuff begin? And how is it still existing today? By asking all of those questions, you will now reveal a deeper interpretation or understanding of what's really going on. And when that happens, that's when you will actually start to address the so-called powers that be from an empowered space, because now you have now revealed them for what the so-called you have revealed. Not, you haven't pointed the finger, you have revealed the foundation that you would have pointed of the individuals that you would have pointed the finger at. You have removed the foundation from their their so-called power grid, and you have acknowledged and traced back the origins of the deceptions to begin with. And once that happens, the entire world completely shifts, because now you have shifted the power from outside of yourself to within yourself. Because when you trace back the so-called their origins, you have to inherently trace back your origins. And in that tracing back of all that information, that's where the true power comes from. And that's where you start really making some actual changes. This is why I harp on so much the importance of not being so consumed by the lies, but empowering yourself with the truth, your truth in your journey, making your way to your truth through your belief systems. If you go through your belief systems, just keep barreling through your belief systems until you reach that truth that is just the most simple thing in your reality. That's where your true power lies.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's one where it's difficult not to, though, when they're, in some respects, if the best example of this for me is probably the ISS. They're handing it to you. They're actually physically showing it to you because they want you to look at it. In my opinion, I think they want us jumping up and down and pointing at the guy, the guy with the three carb Monty. Rips somebody off, and then the person ripped off stands next to him going, "This guy's ripped me off." Before you know it, the people have come to see what all the fuss is about, and a few of them will also get ripped off. And in my view, that's what we're doing with NASA. We're highlighting it, so they're getting all the free advertising out of us at the moment. In my view, I don't know. Maybe you can give us something a bit more positive for the viewers going forward, or maybe not. Tell us what you're doing specifically moving forward, how you're addressing this.
I'm addressing it by, mostly my focus is on the human story, really looking at empowering people, or setting up a platform for people to empower themselves. Because if we continue to focus on what's outside of us, we won't ever be able to address this from a space to actually make any kind of change. So my focus is really to share a lot of the information that relates to the ancestors, share a lot of the information that relates to the foundations of this so-called powers that be power grid, share a lot of the information that is relative to who and what we are on the most basic soul, mind, and body perspective, and really get outside of the deception programming that we've been bombarded with for centuries. And as long as that can take an entire lifetime. That can take an entire lifetime. If that can take an entire lifetime for an individual, it's sure as hell going to take a long time for an entire collective to come around and start doing that. But if people start doing it together, that's when the growth of this shift will start happening exponentially, because you have this person brings this to the table, then this person brings that to the table, then it activates, and then it just keeps on going up. But if individuals are still saying, this is what needs to change, and you're only going one step at a time, just like one rung on the ladder, like building ladders for people, and just letting them be there, just exist for what they are, instead of like trying to sell ladders and make a profit off of that, and then say, "No, I made this, I invented this ladder." It's like, no, you didn't invent shit. All this exists out here naturally. Everything is already existing organically. That's the real way to actually shift this reality, or the most impactful way is to pretty much be hands off. Information is information. I'm no different than you. I'm no different than anybody else out here. I just have a perspective just like you have a perspective. And we're gonna either address this or not. And I just focus on what information. Another way that I add on to that is I also personally take on the responsibility of speaking on what I feel is not being spoken on. The information that I see is not being addressed is also very important in reference to what is being addressed, because in the stuff that we are not looking at, and not addressing as part of these storylines, that is energy. And that energy can be manipulated by the so-called powers that be to be flipped and reversed and sold back to us in their way to empower the system if we don't acknowledge it. So something like not really tracing the origins of white supremacy and the racial division that's going the divide and conquer program. If we don't trace back those origins, then the new age agenda will sell us this new age love and light, unity, new world order, new world religion perspective, only for the benefit of the so-called powers that be, to make a profit off of our lack of knowledge that they shouldn't be in power in the first damn place. That shouldn't even be existing because of how much devastation and tragedy and blood and bones that this entire system exists on. So it's just like watering that system the way that one of the big alchemical spells that are used against the people is to water everything down. Just completely water your perspective individually and collectively. Water it all down and sell it to you as this simple television version of experiencing your reality. Everything is about this globe Earth. Isn't it beautiful? We're all one on this whole thing. So this story does exist. The human story does exist on one perspective. But if you do not change, do not realize all of the other parts of that human story, that's when you will allow yourself to be locked into possibly, potentially a control grid that is not for the benefit of the people, but is actually for the benefit of the so-called powers that be.
I mean, is that the summary of the human story, or is that the summary of the control structure that leads us into things like white supremacy? I mean, obviously these things are all interconnected. I'm not trying to be facetious by getting you to boil it down to be one or the other, but I'll rephrase that.
It's part of both.
Expand on what you describe as the human story and where there's a deception being perpetrated.
Well, to make it as simple as possible, the human story, you can look back at the relationship that humans have with land, the history of war, the history of cultures, the history of the indigenous and the aboriginal people. I just have a deja vu right now. This is a trip. So yeah, the actual storyline that the ancestors are still telling to this day. If you go to the Hopi reservation, they will tell you their cosmology. They will tell you their history that will mirror image the Mayan cosmology, the Aztec cosmology, the Inca cosmology, the Cometian cosmology in its own way. All of these are mirror images of this storyline. These stories existed well before the Columbian era, well before the heliocentric model, well before any of these banking industries all took form. The human story exists in the cosmologies, in the so-called creation myths and all the storylines that were told verbally around the fires by the ancestors, whether they were on Africa, South America, North America, Asia, wherever it was. These stories are the human story, and these are the stories that are not being recognized or acknowledged by the majority of people, because subconsciously we still exist in the program that has been delivered by the Manifest Destiny colonial mind control program of your ancestors, those people back in the day. Those are all primitive and savage. They have no information. They have no understanding of this world or understanding of technology that could be of any benefit for you today. Your smartphone is the evolutionary peak of the human storyline. So shut your damn mouth and listen to what it is that we're telling you to do. This is what the university system and the government as it is running today is doing to the individual and the mass consciousness when they install the monkey evolution program, when they install the Big Bang, when they install these bogus theories and laws and the heliocentric model and so forth. When you are bombarded by all of those deceptions, you are simultaneously separated from your origins, your connections. And these storylines that exist, that were told around the fires by the ancestors, is the human storyline. So that's where I start to go into, and that's different for everybody. People in Thailand are going to have their own story. The Hindus have their own story. People or from the Inca and, you know, like the Mayan culture, like all of these, everybody has their own story, their own origins, their own relationships, their own interpretation of this reality. And when you really boil it all down, you'll see that everybody was telling the same story because they had a connection with nature that we are worlds away from. And that's at the core of this. The relationship with nature, the relationship with land, the relationship with the body, the energetic body that the human experience is, that has been all but completely severed by this Western civilization that has just been like put right onto, no, this is humanity. This is the reality. You shut your mouth and you experience this. Well, what about all? Don't look at all that. That's primitive and savage. See, once that door is just being opened right now to realize that it exists. And a lot of people don't want to go into that information because it's dirty in there. It's fucking painful in there too when you start looking at that information, because there is still blood and bones that existing right down the street. There's malls sitting on top of ancient burial grounds right down the street from my hometown right now. The Ohlone people showed them. I talked about this in my last video in reference to the Occupy Oakland storyline. The first day of Occupy Oakland, we had some Ohlone representatives come down there on day one, and they were the first ones to speak on the microphone in Occupy Oakland and pretty much say, how the fuck are you going to occupy occupied land? Who the hell do you think you are occupying Native American land? You need to be thinking about this information before you think you're making some change in the world. Because if you think you're making some change in the world, you're coming at this from a very shallow perspective, and you might be setting up a program that is actually beneficial for the next control grid. So I was actually there in day one and realizing that, and knowing that there is a mall built on top of sacred burial grounds right down the street from where we were standing. And I had to ask myself, what am I really trying to do here? What kind of change am I looking for? Am I trying to fix the system? What does this system benefit anything right now? What is the human story? What were the Ohlone people really connected to? Their perspective in this entire reality? How is their perspective any different from what happened in the genocide and the massacres in Africa? How is that different than what happened to the Aboriginal people in Australia and the Polynesian people? How is that different? Because these same flags are being flown today. And this is not to point fingers at any particular race. I'm talking about power. I'm talking about land. Yes, it does have particular connections when you see pictures of those old people who are standing on top of blood and bones, talking about, we conquered the Taino people in Puerto Rico. We conquered all this other. This is our land now. Installing the Christianity, installing the mind control programs to separate you from your soul, your mind, and your body. All of this is one story that is part of this psychological mind control program of manifest destiny. That manifest destiny exists on top of the blood and the bones of the original human story. And until we recognize that the original human story that exists, that predates that manifest destiny, that predates the colonial and Columbian area, that predates heliocentrism, until we acknowledge that that exists, we're just going to be fluffing our feathers and just talking shit, yelling at bankers when we are standing on blood and bones. You can point your finger all day, but if you don't realize that you're standing on blood and bones, what are you really doing?
They hijack that too, though, for purposes of making flat Earth look stupid. You know, it's the ancient people that saw that the world was flat,
Exactly.
and they are the ones to be conquered, ridiculed, and thought of as idiotic. Therefore, if you consider the Earth is flat, you are primitive, and they are the people that have been defeated. They're the people that have been conquered. Why would you ever want to consider your cognition anything like theirs? they are beneath us. And what you're saying is that when they say beneath us in terms of cognition and logic, you're saying literally with blood on their soles of their shoes, they're beneath them.
It's that same Darwinian mentality of the evolutionary peak of humanity. It's like, it's that linear process through time. We can't even comprehend that the ancient people had technologies that surpasses what we have today, because we believe in Darwin. We believe in that monkey evolution program. We believe we went to the fucking moon. We believe that we're going to Mars. We believe that this smartphone is the best thing. You can't even answer the question of who built the pyramids. You can't answer the question of how these pyramids are all over the place.
In their system, it's absolutely necessary to have this conquest of land. This is now mine because it's extremely valuable. And there's at least now coming to flat earth, there seems there's a huge potential that in and of itself is complete nonsense. I'm glad you've shouted the word land about 5 or 6 times, because it's the most critical part. If you can convince people that they're not making any more of it and we're trapped on a globe, there's no more land to be had, then it's something worth fighting over. And we started out by you saying about the Queen owning Canada, and that's really what it's all about. It's the people who are in control. I'm not trying to point fingers at the WHO, but you're very right. There's people who control this land, and it's not that they own it, it's that they control it. They control the people that are on it. That's where it really boils down to you and I. That's what it's really all about, because, you know, there might be tons of land for all we know, but what they really want is control of us. The ground beneath their feet is kind of irrelevant if they can go and get a load more of it. And they have, in our recent history, done exactly that. We've seen it. We know that's true. You're stood on the very land that is part of that history. So we know this is true. It gets more and more difficult, though, as you expand out into Australia and the New World, as you're on now, to control all of these people. It becomes more and more difficult. And now we have the one world religion that is the globe. That's what unifies us all. And it's possibly the most terrifying religion of them all, knowing how we are controlled through work of people like yourself. I don't know how long we've been running. Is there lots more keen information that we need to get into this broadcast before I start thanking you and rounding up?
Oh no, I just wanted to build on the before we close out, the alchemy. That's like we were talking about control. It's not so much that they have control; they have that control, but they have the control of the alchemy that sets the foundation to that control. And that's where I want to express a lot, is that if we start to understand the alchemy of that control, then that's when we can start to decipher it and remove it from our reality. As long as we just approach it from they have control, they have power, that's powerless. We're not empowering ourselves. But if we recognize that there's an alchemy that's being sold, an example of that alchemy is history in Canada. I was just talking to a friend of mine the other day about people don't talk about the people who are I don't know the word. I got a brain fart of the people who live in Canada. The people who live in Canada, they don't know the history of Canada. They don't know that. It's not taught in school. It's not taught, because if you teach that history, same thing in public education systems in the United States. We're not taught about the depths of what happened to the Native Americans. We're taught about Christopher Columbus. We're taught about like this shallow version of this is why Black History Month exists. That's a fucking mind control program to say, well, here you go. This is your history. We're giving something to you, not to mention the fact that they have shrunk it down to a sliver of this reality, especially when you come to the story of the melanated people across the earth plane. So these are the alchemy storylines that exist, not only here, but in all across the world, that are different. They're categorized, just like you have different name brands and labels of genetically modified foods in the Dominican Republic and Thailand. And it's the same orange soda that's going to give your fucking grandmother Alzheimer's. It's the same damn food that's going to make your children sick, but it's got a particular coded label on there to just get you believing, like to make a real connection with it and be like, oh, this is okay. This is fine. No. That's just an example of how this intricate this program is, how intricate this design is, that keeps us from realizing the depths of this program, because we just accept it as it's okay. It's fine. It's been going on forever. I'm not going to sit around while that happens. I've already had my life stripped away from me by joining into the army. I've already been cataloged literally as a number. And so you're saying, look, this is you don't have a life anymore. This is what all the soldiers do when they go into the military. You're not a person. You're not a human anymore. You are a number for this system to exist. And if you fight this, we'll destroy your fucking life. If you run away from it, you will not have a life. You will be completely destroyed. You will never be able to get a job. You'll be, even the people who get out of the army honorably. Look at all the veterans on the street. Veterans who fought for their country, living homelessly on the street right now. Killing, the suicide rate is absurd. There is no humanity in this experience. And this relationship that the military has through the military industrial complex with the entire collective consciousness is being installed into the civilian population. I've seen this. A perfect example is when I was in, I still had the ID card, which was just a laminated piece of paper that said my name, my social, and then the army, and then my rank. But a year after I was in, they made a requirement to have the new ID card, which was microchipped, and they had the same microchip that is in everybody's debit card today, was first practiced and installed into the soldiers. No different than the same testing that they do with the vaccines. They test out all of this vaccine, and all of this technology is first tested on the soldiers, then sold to the civilian population. That's actually the reason for these programs existing out there. So I'm seeing every day this program being expanded from the military thought process, from installing fear, because that's how they control soldiers, with fear. If you run away, you're done. You're done. If you do this, you're wrong. You're done. It's all fear based. So that same fear is being installed through Hollywood, through politics, through your music, through the economics. That fear is being installed into the civilian population. And if we do not anchor ourselves that in the space that predates the Western civilization and everything that is added up to everything that we've been talking today, if we don't anchor ourselves before that, we're just going to be talking shit, just pointing the fingers, talking shit. You can do that all day. I'm not talking shit no more. I'm making it's time to start making connections with this system as a whole and address this system as a whole.
Absolutely. I mean, because it's got to the hour, it was about an hour, which is about right. I was pleased that I hadn't said it like 20 minutes or something. But yeah, time just flies when you're having a good conversation. We could go on all day. I know you had a great comment in one of your most recent videos about your vaccination experiences, but maybe that's for another day. Can you point the audience to some of your videos and give a plug to anything else that you'd like to give a plug to while you're at it?
Well, I have, and thank you for that, first of all. I have I put a little playlist on the top of my YouTube channel called Latest Top Picks. And I guess that would be the videos that I would share with people to kind of get like a feel of where I'm coming from and an overall understanding of the content that I put up there. But I've also made other playlists on that channel that kind of categorize the videos from topics like the Mandela effect, topics like transhumanism, the synthetic universe, the new age, mind control program, flat earth, and a playlist called hieroglyphics, which is just a collection of some teachers, some information videos that I have that have helped me along the way. And it's like over 100 videos in there too. That's just kind of like a broad spectrum approach to various information. It's really up to the individual, because I talk about pretty much everything that is interesting to me. So it's kind of like all over the place, but there's a method to the madness, in a sense, on there. Once you start really seeing where I'm coming from, it might be abrasive or aggressive to some people. I don't mean to, I don't mean to
No,
be.
no, no. I love that. I love that. I'm only a recent subscriber. I'm not gonna lie, but I'll have you on in the background, and you'll say something that just gets your attention. You go, "Oh, hello." So I absolutely love that. You call it abrasive. I call it hard hitting. I like that a lot.
Yeah, it's like old school. It's like old school grandparents. You get your ass beat, you know. That's where I come from. I have family members. They believe in whoopings and all that other stuff. And beyond the psychological programming of where whoopings come from and all that, of slavery and all that, it's just that real hardcore essence of telling it like it is, without the physicalness of it, but just tell it like it is. Because a lot of this talk gets washed out with this whole political correctness and all that other stuff. That's like the shallow version when they talk about you're being too politically correct. There's like 10 layers deeper than what that actually represents. So I just maintain as much as I can my connections with my family, my style, who I am, my roots, and try not to point any fingers on any individuals, but really just to share the information as it is. And I just like to send another shout out to, or a shout out to other channels like I watch, like Bro Sanchez TV is another channel that I would share information about. If you want to go into, he does a really good job at breaking down the specifics of the alchemy and the relationships to the ancestors, the relationships that predate this storyline, the information that predates all of this programming that exists within this Western civilization. He breaks it down very concisely, very, very detailed, as opposed to me, where I come more philosophical. Like I like to just flow on a poetic philosophical perspective. He's more like narrowing it down. So I get a lot of information from Bro Sanchez, and I respect what he does too. So
Cool. Anyone else you want to give a shout out to before we round out?
um I pretty much ODD TV. I appreciate all the work that he's done. And his support, and all the other people, all my subscribers, pretty much everybody who's subscribed to me. Just a shout out to everybody who shows support in the comment section and shares the videos. And like I said, I don't have Twitter or Facebook. All my information is just on YouTube. So all of this stuff just gets shared by people. And I really do appreciate that, because that's how this channel has actually really grown from 2 subscribers to what I am today. And it really does help, because I, even to like 2 days ago, I've seen views on videos go down on my videos. I've seen that stuff literally happen. It happened when I was talking about the Pizzagate stuff. That happened overnight. I lost like hundreds of views on a video. So I mean, and it's understood. I could see how that's going, because I mean, this is Google. I mean, this is YouTube. This is their world. So they're going to do whatever it is they're going to do. That's not going to stop us from doing what our responsibility is, to put this information out there. So I really do want to thank all of the people who support this channel and share the information, because that's really, it's big time.
Yeah, and that's
So
Subtle Infinity. I will put a link below this video. So if you're watching on the re-upload, just click on that link and subscribe there. And yeah, as you say, big shout out to Bro Sanchez and ODD, who do fantastic work. If you're new to Flat Earth, ODD is most definitely my first share to most people. Flat Earth in 5 minutes. I've shared that video so much because it's great. You know, it just boils it down. But yeah, so definitely click on that link to Subtle Infinity and subscribe to him. And I will also take the opportunity to say a massive, massive thank you to all of my subscribers. As of the end of this broadcast, I'll have hit 1 million views on this Nathan Oakley 1980 channel. So I'm particularly proud of myself. As much as we've had a bit of negativity about views, and I have seen exactly the same thing. I know exactly what you're talking about. I've been doing YouTube for a good maybe 10 years now, and yeah, there is a lot of anomalies that go on. But that said, it's been a strive to get to 1 million views, and I'm very proud of myself that I have done so. That's all down to my guests, i.e. yourself. So a massive, massive thank you to Subtle Infinity for being here, and indeed to all of the people who watch in the live audience. Thank you very much indeed for also watching and for contributing to the million views that I've managed to accumulate on this very channel. So thank you once again. Be sure to like, subscribe if you've not done so already, comment below. I've been Nathan Oakley. I'll see you all in the next video.